Good evening, everybody. The theme of this panel is creating an international marketplace for sustainable aviation fuel, flying zero carbon. Aviation is a global industry. We all fly. We most likely have come here by plane. Statistically, about 1% of you have offsetted the carbon emissions of your flight by buying carbon offsets. My name is Christoph Wolff. I was formerly at the World Economic Forum and now the CEO of the Smart Freight Center. I have the honor to moderate this panel, and let me first introduce the panelists. To the left, we have Bogi Nils Bogason, who is the CEO of Icelandair. We have Sandra Karlsen, head of GoGreen Europe, DHL Global Forwarding. We have Markus Kleiner, Senior Vice President Corporate Development, Environment and Sustainability from Fraport in Germany. Then Jonathan Wood, Vice President Renewable Aviation from Neste. Kjartan Briem, CEO Isavia, who operates the Keflavik Airport and the air navigation services. And Lionel Cousseins, Head of ZEROe, Market and Airlines of Airbus. The interesting part of the panel is they all have to do with aviation, but from very different perspectives. And so we will be very interested to hear from you. Please give me the next slide. Aviation 2 weeks ago had its Paris moment. About 2018, the youth of this planet said, we shouldn't fly, or we should be ashamed of flying. So the word of flight shaming became center stage. And this started a movement within the aviation industry to do something about it. And aviation was outside the Paris Agreement. It's actually an international industry. It's not a country-based. It has its own UN assembly. And 2 weeks ago, this assembly came together, 2,500 delegates from 184 states, and committed to their long-term aspirational goal of net zero by 2050. They also said that the key levers to operate this, besides innovative aircraft technologies and streamlined flight operations, and we will talk about both, is the deployment of sustainable aviation fuel. Next page, please. This is part of a process since 2018, and I think we can give credit to the youth of this planet to actually accelerated this. And the International Industry Association, IATA, basically made a plan, like many other associations and many other organizations. They said for the net zero goal in 2050, about 2/3 will come from sustainable aviation fuel, about 13 from new technologies and infrastructure, and still about 20% from offshore. That may actually be, that number changes a bit. Maybe we don't need actually offsetting anymore. Now, in the meanwhile, corporate customers came on board and said, we want to do more. So we want to actually leverage the markets in order to buy sustainable aviation fuel to be able to offset our carbon emissions. And you see a number of deals, and there's more and more coming. As a matter of fact, the EU Green Deal says by 2030, about 6% of all flights coming out of Europe should be based on sustainable aviation fuel. And if you add up all the commitments outside that, you will have about double that. The US a few weeks ago came with the Inflation Reduction Act, which put significant tax incentives on producing sustainable aviation fuel, such that it actually could be at the same price than normal kerosene. Next page, please. There's 4 routes. I will not go into technologies very deeply, but you should have in mind. So there's one route, the left one, which is actually mature today. So today's production is based on waste, basically converting waste lipids, like used cooking oils, to sustainable aviation fuels. The middle two convert waste from agriculture and forest residues or from municipal solid waste into fuel. This is in advanced stages, commercial pilots, but it's not ready at scale. And the third one, which we're all hoping for, because it basically builds on renewable energy and carbon sources from the air, and that would actually be available later in this century, in this decade, sorry, and it would come, today it's more expensive, but it would come down in price in the next years, so will be cost competitive by 2040. Next page, please. So you see there's all kinds of plans now popping up. You see the projection of the EU Commission that actually after 2030, it's mostly about renewable-based aviation fuel. And you see over by 2050 that a lot of that comes from Asia Pacific and Europe. And the map is such that Iceland is not on it. Yeah? But I think the idea could be that Iceland could be a major producer because both ingredients of power to liquid are here. Low-cost renewables and technology of capturing carbon. And the mix of that is actually, as we see on the next page, actually the chemical process actually combines hydrogen, renewably generated hydrogen from electrolyzers with carbon from the air into a sustainable aviation fuel. And this is actually something that that will scale dramatically. And the last page from my intro is, so three questions come to my mind. Now commitments are there. Now it's about going the path that we announced. How can we accelerate action and implementation? What could be the role of Nordic countries and the Arctic? Could there be a hub for sustainable aviation via power to liquid? Or is it only SAF and sustainable aviation fuels, and what is the role of other levers? So I will join my panel and would like give the first question to Bogason from Icelandair. Will the global aviation industry be able to fully decarbonize, and how is Icelandair contributing to this?
Thank you, Christoph, and good afternoon, everyone. Arctic Circle is actually a great venue to discuss this topic because aviation is so important for the Arctic area. It connects people here, cultures, is crucial for trade and business in the area, and is also the cornerstone for the tourism industry here. And for island nations like Iceland, aviation is very important. And in 2019, aviation and tourism was 9.5% of our GDP. And without the extensive flight connections to Europe and North America, we would not be able to host Arctic Circle here in Iceland. But in a normal year, aviation causes around 3% of the CO2 emission in the world. And as you mentioned earlier, Christoph, the industry takes this very seriously and has committed to become net zero in the year 2050, which is in line with the Paris Agreement. And we at Icelandair, we have additionally come up with our own goals to reduce the carbon emission from our operation by 50% in the year 2030 compared to 2019. And as was showed on the slide, we will be focusing on 4 key measures to reach the goals of the industry. It's first of all, it's new technology, new aircraft types which are much more fuel efficient and then thereby environmentally friendly than old aircraft types. And we at Icelandair, we have been investing heavily in a new fleet in recent years, and by that we have been taking big steps towards the sustainability goals in 2030. We are also participating in projects where electric and hydrogen-powered aircraft are being developed. And it is very realistic that the domestic operation here in Iceland will be carbon-free before end of this decade. The second measure is just operational improvements among the airlines, among our suppliers, and also among the governments and authorities. One example is the Single European Sky initiative, which is about, we can say, taking down borders within the European air traffic control management and centralize the management and simplify regulations. And just by that simple decision, the European Union can decrease the carbon emission from European aviation by 10%. The third measure, and the biggest one, is of course the sustainable aviation fuel, as you mentioned. The good thing there is that there is not a need for a complicated modification of the aircraft or the engines, but the challenge is the supply is still very, very low. So there we need a huge investment in the near future. And the fourth one is, of course, carbon offsetting. But the absolute key to all of this, to make progress in all of this, is cooperation. All stakeholders have to come together and work on this, including the governments, and they have to focus on incentives and support instead of taxes and fees.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bogi. Sandra, how can a global forwarder like DHL accelerate decarbonization of aviation?
Yeah, thanks, Christoph, for the question, and good afternoon also to all of you from my side. Maybe to clarify what a freight forwarder is, we are that part of DHL organizing for companies global transportation, air and ocean freight. So if some of you wanted to reach out to me for help while their package from DHL got late, disappoint you, I can't help you with that. Yeah, we see that transportation and aviation is between two development curves. We have been focusing very much on increasing efficiency with the aircraft improvements Bogi was talking about. But we see those efficiency increases leveling out slowly, and the second curve, which is about true decarbonization, is really about to start, and we need to accelerate that. As DHL Global Forwarding, part of the overall Deutsche Post DHL group, we've committed to ambitious climate target, and one of them is in particular to have 30% sustainable aviation fuel share in our operations by the year 2030. And with that, we want to contribute to increase the demand side. But to get that achieved, we heard the supply side is still difficult. And we really need here a level playing field, market-based measures, incentives, because blending mandates might be helpful, but they're not helping to help us get the supply we need so we can achieve our targets. The other side, how we can help, is clearly by giving our customers, the shippers, the companies, access to easy solutions how they can do their part. Because if you look at it with air freight transport, they might not have direct access to the solutions the airlines have in place, what's happening at the airports, and we need flexible solutions so that those shippers also can do their part to achieve their science-based targets, for example, and we need those flexible solutions really, right now and not tomorrow. Because in the end, there's the saying, right, we're all in the same boat. I would say we are on the same aircraft in that particular case. So, the call here is we need those solutions now, and we are ready to help our customers to give them the transparency. What is the carbon footprint of their shipments, how you can improve them with measurements like consolidation, doing carrier selection, doing different optimization here, but then really what can take us forward, especially for the next 10 years, is in setting solutions like the usage of sustainable aviation fuels instead of the normal used kerosene. And that's where we can help or want to help and need to help.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Sandra. I'm sure we will come back to that. Markus, Fraport operates many airports around the world in the big hub. So how can an airport guide the journey towards sustainable aviation?
Well, first of all, thank you, Christoph, for inviting me and bringing me to Iceland. For me, it's the first time. And I told you, Bogi, I flew Icelandair, of course.
Me too.
And I did compensate or I should say Fraport compensated for my flight, because that is actually the only topic where we use compensation for the time being. You mentioned it. It's not only Frankfurt Airport, but we operate 30 airports around the world, bigger ones, smaller ones. Frankfurt is our biggest hub and basically our home base. The key for us as an airport operator, I think, is we are in the middle of a systemic industry, so to say. You know, by chance, I just realized that we either going to meet in a few weeks or we have met in the past. We can probably exchange views on, the challenges about decarbonizing an airport. Obviously, Icelandair is one of our customers in Frankfurt, and DHL is one of the biggest freight forwarder at Frankfurt Airport. So you see the system. Yeah. We are very dependent upon each other, and obviously aviation happens in the air, but it happens also on the ground. And the key bit for us as an airport operator is probably to bring people also together to some extent and to facilitate these kind of talks, because there is, as we all know, a big challenge for us to abate this sector. We are a hard-to-abate sector, and I personally believe it's the biggest transformation that we have to come through successfully as an industry, as a sector. And as an airport operator specifically, obviously there are emissions that we directly can influence and control, and we do so. We have committed as Fraport to be net zero by 2045. And for us, the main goal is obviously to bring down energy consumption of our passenger terminals, our cargo terminals, of the office buildings, of the service buildings that you have at an airport. And believe me, there are many of them. Besides, we have a large fleet. We have a large ground traffic fleet. For example, in Frankfurt alone, we operate about 3,500 vehicles on the apron. Now that is a large number, and it obviously takes time and a lot of investment to go from obviously diesel and gasoline engines to electrified vehicles. We need to figure out a few bits and pieces here and there, because take, for example, a big aircraft tug that tugs and pushes aircraft. Now, we make first experiences with electrifying these kind of vehicles, but it's not as straightforward as electrifying a simple car, because you also need time to charge, and there's a lot of power requested, obviously, to tug a 747 or an A380, as we all know, I guess. So for us, it is really that focus on bringing the system partners together on the one hand, but predominantly bringing down the emissions. And last but not least, as you just already mentioned, SAF clearly is the sharpest tool in our toolbox. In the end, we feel very committed not only to our scopes 1 and 2, but also to our scope 3, which at an airport still represents about 90% of the overall emissions. And the question therefore is, how can we avoid using the so-called auxiliary power unit in aircraft for taxiing, or when aircraft need to air condition the cabin, for example. So there are many, many topics that we work together closely with the airlines, also with the freight forwarders, with people like Jonathan here to my left about how to use SAF, and especially also with the likes of Airbus and Boeing, who in the end need to also help us, that we don't have to rebuild our entire infrastructure. Because if we move, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that, if we moved, for example, to more and more hydrogen or maybe electrified aircraft, this of course might also need then to lead to changes in the airport infrastructure.
Excellent, thank you very much. Jonathan, when it comes to sustainable aviation fuels, your company Neste, so it's not Nestlé, Neste, plays a very important role. So you're actually moved on that very early, and now are basically right there when it comes to ramping this up. Please tell us more about Neste and your contributions, Neste's contributions to decarbonizing aviation.
Thank you, Christoph, and great to be here in Iceland. For me, it's the second time, and I definitely want to come back again, by air, of course. And the great thing about this group we've got here together today is it's a microcosm of what we've got to do together, and the alignment that we're now achieving gives me a lot of confidence that this journey that we've got to take the industry on to decarbonize by 2050, we can do it, but it's a huge undertaking. It may only be 3% of the global carbon emissions today, but aviation is the one industry, if we accept the 2020-2021 COVID period, it's the only industry where emissions have continued to grow. So that share of global emissions will increase unless we take action. And as has been said, we now are committed to do that. We need to set targets, not just for 2050, but for the nearer term, 2030 and even earlier. And that's where Neste, I think, has really, as you say, Christoph, taken a leadership position. Neste is, by origin, a normal fuel manufacturing and marketing company based out of Finland, and it took the decision 15 years ago or more, based off its quite significant expertise in handling difficult crude oils and difficult raw materials, to to leverage that expertise and to say, right, we're going to stop taking crude oil out of the ground. We're going to start recycling waste materials. And so Neste is committed to basically, has already moved to a position where all of our capital expenditure is being spent on recycling waste materials and producing renewable fuels and other circular solutions. So we're not only now producing renewable fuel for the aviation sector, but also have for many years been producing renewable fuel for the road transport sector, renewable diesel, and also now we're starting to produce renewable recycled feedstocks for the chemicals industry, and are even looking at how we can liquefy waste plastics and recycle them. So everything that Neste is now doing is about recycling and the circular economy, and aviation is just one of those sectors we're playing in. And we're already delivering a significant emission reduction. Some 10 million tons of carbon per annum are being reduced by using our products rather than fossil-based products, and we plan to double that this decade. And within the aviation sector, we've now, for the last 2 or 3 years, started to bring sustainable aviation fuel to market, and we've got big plans to, and we're investing billions of dollars as we speak, to increase that by 10 times by this time next year, and we need to do more. And it's not just Neste. We're taking a leadership position, but it's very clear that we, as Christoph said, we need to invest not just in the production technologies that we've got today, but those that we believe can be scaled up and expand the renewable feedstocks that we can use, so that we can indeed transition the entire industry to sustainable aviation fuel over time. One thing to also bear in mind with sustainable aviation fuel is this is about recycling the carbon we've got in the atmosphere. So it produces approximately 80% reduction in carbon emissions versus the fossil jet fuel that we typically use today. And the great thing about it is, as was mentioned earlier, it can be put in our existing aircraft, in our existing fuel supply chain infrastructure. Yes, other forms of aircraft propulsion, such as with hydrogen or electric, will definitely have a role to play. But here and now, today, and for certainly the next decade, sustainable aviation fuel, and in particular the production technologies we've got available today, will be the key to decarbonising and getting us to maybe 10% carbon reduction, or rather 10% SAF usage by 2030. But what's really important here is we bring together the production side of this, investing in new capacity, sourcing the renewable waste materials, but then also developing helping demand grow. This is a higher cost product than fossil jet fuel. So that's the big challenge. How can we transition to a higher cost fuel, make it easy for our customers, the corporate customers, and indeed all of us in this room today to choose to fly with SAF, and then work also with the policymakers to put in place the right kind of incentives to help encourage both the supply and the demand in a way that works globally, not just for one country or another. So that's the pathway that Neste is embarked on, and we look forward to working together with the colleagues around the conversation here, but also look forward to others investing to increase the supply.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. You said 10% in 2030. That sounds like a small number. Yeah, when you get to zero carbon 2050, we should know though that by today it's 0.01%. Yeah, sustainable aviation fuel. So we, over the next couple of actually 8 years, we need to do the factor of 1,000 already, yeah, in order to get there. So we will come back to this enormous scale up and what needs to be in place. Kjartan, I learned a lot from you yesterday when we had our conversation in your special role as an air navigation service provider out of Iceland, basically covering an area which is as big as Europe. Yeah? Tell us more about your operations and how you can contribute, or how you contribute to sustainability in aviation.
Thank you, Christoph, and thanks for having me here. Yes, so the ANSPs of the world, like Isavia ANSs. We handle the air traffic management in the sky. So our main task is, of course, to keep the skies safe. But we do have a role in this. Looking at the carbon zero goals of 2050, there's been a talk about that the air traffic management can contribute like 6 to 8% of the total. And Bogi mentioned a little bit ways of how to do that, and the ways are in fact simple. We can help the fuel consumptions to go down by having more direct routes, by helping the airlines in keeping the altitudes at the right level so the fuel consumption is minimized, and also, of course, to minimize the holdings of circling around airports and so on that will also spend a lot of fuel. And because Bogi was mentioning the single European sky, it's quite interesting, as you mentioned, that we have a really big airspace covering all the way from the west coast of Greenland to almost the east coast of Norway and up to the North Pole. That we do operate almost like this, the same as the single European sky is, and we do it as one operator. And by doing it in this way, we really can, create this efficiency, cost efficiency, and support the airlines in the direct routes and the altitudes that really is the goal for Europe in this large project of the single European sky. So that's how we contribute to this whole equation.
Excellent, thank you very much. Lionel, we just said, the beauty of sustainable aviation fuels is you don't have to change much. Yeah, so the airport can stay the same, the aircraft can stay the same. So you basically create a synthetic fuel. But Airbus is going beyond that. So and is creating new pathways, and you're in the middle of that. So tell us more about it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Christoph, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So the hydrogen will play definitely an important role in aviation decarbonization, as you mentioned already, Christoph. And this first domain of application is on the SAF, the sustainable aviation fuels. Today, the SAF that are available are based on biomass, and we believe that in the future there will not be probably not enough biomass to power all the aircraft fleet in the world. So we will have to go to the next generation of SAF, and you talk about the power to liquid synthetic fuels. And this is really the next step, and where hydrogen will play a key role as an ingredient of these power to liquid synthetic fuels. At Airbus, we are working today on the certification of our aircraft, and together with engine manufacturers, we are working to have this, our aircraft certified to fly 100% SAF. Today, it's already 50%. It means that our aircraft can fly today with a blend of 50% SAF. We are working to reach the 100% certification by the end of this decade. So that's the first domain of application of hydrogen. Then the second step for us will be the hydrogen aircraft. We are working on, we have announced publicly 2 years ago it was, that we are working on the hydrogen project, aircraft that is called ZEROe, with the ambition to bring this aircraft and to market this aircraft in 2035. That will be, of course, very challenging in terms of technology, very challenging in terms of development of the deployment of the infrastructure. And we are partnering with different airport and energy suppliers in the world to really understand what it has taken and what does it mean to deploy such an infrastructure at airports. But we believe that's the right path to go. And by the way, these two elements are not contradictory. In fact, they are more. There will be synergies out of that. Because the concept aircraft we are working on for the moment will be limited in range in the first generation of hydrogen aircraft. Meaning that in 2035 we will start operating these hydrogen aircraft for small to medium range missions, leaving the part of the market to the sustainable aviation fuel, because we will not have any other option to decarbonize. So that's really a complementary approach that we see. And in the meantime, until the 2035, of course, the SAF will play completely their role to decarbonize the aviation, and the power to liquid in particular will play an important role at the next generation of sustainable aviation fuels. So in both elements, we will need green hydrogen, and the Arctic countries are really well placed with a lot of renewables here. And because what is important for the moment, and what is an obstacle at the takeoff of SAF, is the cost of these fuels, and this is mainly coming from the cost of renewables. So the countries like Iceland will play an important role in this decrease of the cost, operating cost for our customers, and in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dear audience, as you can see, this is kind of a well-tuned orchestra. So an ecosystem, everybody needs to collaborate and work together, and everybody needs to be part of. So aviation, thankfully, is something that everybody has experienced. So we're all flying. So I would like to ask the audience if there are some questions. Yeah, sign of hand. Yeah, if there is a question. And while I'm looking around, so I may ask a next question to Sandra. Yeah, so if that's okay. So you mentioned the concept of insetting. So we need to be, of course, very short in answers now. Insetting vis-a-vis offsetting. So what is the concept about, and how can it accelerate aviation fuel uptake?
So in short, offsetting is about investing in climate protection projects, for example, reforestation, which would be reducing your carbon footprint, not where you create the carbon footprint, so outside of your sector. And insetting, the benefit of it is you would be investing into the area where you cause the emissions, so to speak. So when you create flexible mechanisms that companies can invest into using sustainable fuels while they don't directly use the fuel themselves because it's being done by the airline, that would be then a concept how it can accelerate decarbonization of air freight by players getting access to something they typically otherwise would not have to.
And corporate customers are very willing to use that in order to basically decarbonize their supply chain. And if we add up all the sustainable aviation fuel needed by 2030 because of the mandate and because of corporate commitments, so we have currently a huge supply-demand gap. Jonathan, what needs to happen to fill that?
Well, some policy certainty, and certainly Europe and the UK and the United States taking a lead in that to give the confidence for multi-billion-dollar investments to be made, to work on then the sourcing of the renewable waste materials so that we can actually bring this material, this SAF, this sustainable aviation fuel, to market. I mean, it's both a supply and a demand equation, and the policymakers can play a very important, helpful role. But I do believe that we, as an industry, together need to make it as easy as possible for end customers, and particularly for corporations and companies who are looking to decarbonize their supply chains. We need to make it as easy as possible for them to then choose to pay that extra to decarbonize their activities and make it part of the value proposition that at the end of the day is brought to the end consumer. All of us, every day are making choices as to what we buy, and we also need to be choosing as private consumers, and that will help, I believe, together with the environmental and government and the ESG targets that corporations have. I believe that will then help us create the momentum, but there's hundreds of billions of dollars that's going to have to be invested here. Neste is in itself doing that, but it's going to take many other companies like Neste for us to achieve the scale up we need.
Bogi, we were all united yesterday that Iceland can actually play a significant role in producing sustainable aviation fuel. You've got everything here, low-cost energy, technology. Can Iceland ramp up and play a role?
Yeah, definitely. We have the resources, but we as a nation, we have to make the decision to utilize the resources because we need more energy to, participate and be a leading nation in the aviation energy transition. And also just the location of the country is an opportunity itself. The flying distance from the east coast of the US is rather short, and the same goes for the flights to Europe. So we can be a hub, a refilling station for hydrogen or recharging station for batteries. So definitely there are endless opportunities, but we as a nation, we have to make a decision how to go forward.
Marcus, you were saying airports of the future are going to be energy hubs, yeah?
True.
So,
True.
How will that look like?
I think, so already now we are mobility hubs, you could say, because obviously there is, a lot of transport means that somehow lead and end at airports, but then also again lead away from airports. Not only, flights, but high-speed trains, regional trains. We obviously talk about eVTOLs and urban mobility, especially in the vicinity of larger metropolitan areas. And in that respect, I expect, given also the discussions we just had before the panel also, Lionel, I expect us in the future to clearly become energy hubs as well. We need to provide not only SAF, but we need to provide not only energy for vehicles to obviously be charged, be it on the apron, be it also private vehicles that stop by, change maybe the mode of transportation, but generally also probably in the future for hydrogen. And that makes us, a hub in every single way, be it, for airlines, be it for energy, be it for all means of mobility.
Well, 40 minutes is very short for the future of flying, of aviation, which concerns us all. I want to thank you very much to my distinguished panel here, well-tuned orchestra that together will make it happen. And I can assure you there's a lot of hope. So the future of aviation is basically not only emerging, but it's almost there. So we now have to scale it up rapidly. And in the future, I've already told our sons who said we shouldn't fly. We shouldn't be ashamed of flying. We just have to make sure we compensate and we get more, we accelerate sustainable aviation fuels. Thank you very much.